We are all set to call the meeting to order when you're ready.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is Damian Meyer. I'm chairperson of the commission this year. Agenda item number 1 is the call to order. It's 9:30 a.m. on July 28, 2022. I'm calling this meeting of the Citizens Clean Elections Commission to order. We're doing this on Zoom, so I'd like to ask that the audience members please keep their microphones on mute, please. And with that, we will take attendance. Commissioners, please identify yourselves for the record.
That's not it.
We'll go ahead and start with Commissioner Chan. And you're on mute.
Thank you. I thought I clicked it and I don't know what I did wrong. Amy Chan, present.
And Mark Kimball, present.
And Commissioner Payton and Commissioner Titler are not here today, but we do have a quorum, so we're going to proceed. Before we move on to item 2, I want to note that we will be taking item 5 before item 4, so we can hear from the Maricopa County Election Director, Scott Jarrett, so we can get back to the most important work of preparing for the primary election. So item number 2 on the agenda is discussion and possible action on minutes for the May 19, 2022 meeting. Is there any discussion on the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any discussion, but I would move that we adopt the minutes as written.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
This is Commissioner Kimball, I second.
All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes that's pending. All those in favor say aye. We're going to vote by roll here. So we'll start with Commissioner Chan.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Kimball.
Aye.
I vote aye as well. So the minutes are approved by a vote of 3-0. On to agenda item number 3, discussion and possible action on executive director's report, enforcement and regulatory updates, and legislative update. Tom, I'm going to turn this over to you. You're muted, good sir.
Tom, you are still muted.
Tom, we can't hear you.
Right.
There we go.
This has really gone off swimmingly for me this morning. I'm truly pleased with modern technology. So the primary is next week. We're going to talk about that with Scott. We're really happy to have Scott here. I wanted to note quick, Julian's not here today. He has a family thing he had to attend to, but he is taking a position outside of government, and we may see him again, but he's been a really valuable member of the team over the course of the last 2 years, and has stuck with us despite COVID and some things going a little bit differently than we would have anticipated when he started. But so I'm not sure he'll be here at
Tom, we lost you again. Tom, we can't hear you.
We also delivered 2.3 million voter education guides to voters around the state.
Hey, Tom, you
Yes.
You cut out right after you finished your comment regarding Julian. So can you rewind and start that again? I believe you were talking about the voter education guide.
I'm not sure what to do at this point, quite honestly. I just don't know what to do. So anyone who has any technical advice for me on how to proceed, I'm happy to take it. Otherwise, I think, Chairman, we might want to move to the next agenda item.
Let's give it one more shot here, Tom. Go ahead.
Okay. We mail 2.3 million voter education guides to the voters of Arizona. We've expanded again this year our efforts to make the guide as accessible as possible to as many voters as possible. We worked with the Arizona Commission on the Deaf and Hard of Hearing again on the guide. We have translated it into Navajo. We've translated it into Apache languages. It's available through Sun Sounds for the visually impaired. We had a new vendor this year, and Paula and Gina successfully transitioned us to a new vendor, and that was great. That company is called Advantage Color Graphics, and we believe we estimate around $15,000 in paper conservation savings with that transition. You know, I want to. We also have had our voter line active for people who speak Dene to get voter information. I want to, you can read more of the highlights. It's very extensive. I want to specifically thank Gina, Avery, and Alec and Julian for their work. Obviously, Gina has coordinated all of our debates. I think the debates were impactful this year, perhaps in a way they haven't been in the past, or at least they have in the past, but more so this year, and more attention was paid to them. I believe that you know, Gina's work on that it's an intense period of time, and she's done amazing work there. You know, likewise, you know, getting our website up and ready with Dropbox information and voting information from all the counties is very work intensive, and Alec has taken leadership on that. And meanwhile, Avery has worked behind the scenes on all of those different projects as well, in addition to his outreach activities. So it's really, you know, I don't think it's too much to say that June of primaries for us is our crunch time, perhaps more than for other folks in election world. But you know, as usual, you know, Gina and her team have come through very well. I want to mention we did a lot of outreach activities. I don't mean to short them, but I think you can review them. I do know we have another item we need to get to next. The other thing I wanted to mention, we have relocated. So if you ever wanted to go to the old office, it's not our office anymore, and there's virtually nobody there in the building. Probably will be nobody there by the end of next week. We're now located at 1110 West Washington. We're on the second floor there. This is a building that some people, and I certainly had thought of as the DEQ building. It's now it's DEQ, it's land, it's 2 or 3 different boards, regulatory boards. You know, so we started that. We opened up yesterday, and I want to thank Paula and Mike for staying after this. This has actually been you know, if you've been following the reports here, it's been a several months project of staying, you know, diligently on top of ADOA. ADOA has been very helpful in the process, and so that we're moving towards completion. Our hope, and I know that there's at least, you know, one of you and maybe more would like to have at least one in-person meeting here. I think that, you know, what we'd like to do is try to get that together for August in our new area. We have a new hearing room. It has its own ante room for executive session, and so which will be a nice change should we need to go into executive session. Obviously, as they say, we never expect an executive session, but if there is one, please put your mask on first before you assist others. So that's where we are. Just really quickly, I think I just want to note, you know, we have initiatives are being reviewed at the county level, I believe now. I think they've gone to the Secretary of the County. There's some litigation around them. There are 2 initiatives that relate to clean elections. One of them does a range of changes to voting laws and includes an increase in the public financing program, as well as adding some additional responsibilities, as well as some different kinds of funding sources. And then there is one that's, you know, there's another one that's more closely associated with Terry Goddard that would enhance reporting for independent expenditures and the sources of funding. So I think those are really the highlights. and I wanted to, I want to make sure, to thank everybody on staff. This has been since we last met, has been a real push with the move, the primary, the voter education guide, and the debates. And really, I'm always lucky to work with the folks I work with who have made that made that as seamless as humanly possible. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. And we, on behalf of the commissioners, I just want to extend our gratitude to you, staff, Gina, Avery, Mike, Alec, for doing a great job these last few months. As far as the debates, I was fortunate enough to attend a couple of them. Had Gina talk me into making some Instagram videos for better or for worse. And I know one of the ones that I missed was the Republican gubernatorial primary debate, and there were some clips of that had, north of 8 million views on Twitter. So it was a lot of exposure for the commission, and that's all due to the hard work of Gina and Tom. I really, Avery continues with the exhaustive efforts of outreach, which we appreciate. And Alec, thank you. The Google map with all the locations, very great idea. So from all of us, thank you for all of the voter education you do. It's very much appreciated. I don't know if Amy or Mark have any comments, but I know we need to move on to Mr. Jarrett as well. So if you have a few comments, please, I welcome them, but otherwise we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Kimball. Can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Okay. A couple points, Tom. First of all, I am the unnamed commissioner who's been agitating for in-person meetings again, and I hope that that we can do that in August, and figure out a day that works for a majority of the commission. Second of all, is there anything you can say about the power of fives? This is something that's been pending since the last election cycle. Now we're deep into this election cycle. And it just seems like we owe them, as well as other companies, some kind of resolution on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think, what we said in past meetings is that there's, we've been making progress. I think, frankly, if I were to say that now, that would be an exaggeration. The matter is not, in my view, progressing as quickly as we might should. I'm concerned that we need to have additional resources. We have both litigation and an enforcement action, and my hope is that we can get the additional resources we need to ensure that we are moving with some alacrity at this point.
Okay, I guess.
I think I can at least say this. We have, because this is available on the docket, and we've had some, and it's on it. So there's an interrelationship to some extent between the lawsuit and the enforcement action. And if you were to look at the docket for the lawsuit, you would be able to glean that there is a that there has been some discussion around, as we always do, according to the rules, some way of bringing this case to a resolution that doesn't necessarily involve a full-blown finding, going to the probable cause to believe stage. But I think that the issue that we've kind of run into is that the Power of Fives and its principal or its manager have bifurcated their representation, and the bifurcated representation has resulted in a kind of ping ponging of our relationship with them between those two attorneys in a way that has, I'm not sure. I mean, I frankly just, I'm not sure quite how to resolve yet, but.
Hey,
but,
Tom, pardon me for interrupting you. Can we put a pin in this and then let's go to agenda item number 5 for Mr. Jarrett, and we can come back and revisit this if that's okay procedurally. And I know we wanted him on at 9:45. Will that work?
Yes, there's no reason that should pose a procedural issue.
Okay. Again, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Tom, but I do want to.
No.
So,
I think that's absolutely.
Okay, great.
Absolutely fine.
All right. So what I'm going to do is, after I rudely cut Tom off, I'm going to go to item 5 on the agenda, which we're taking out of order. And for item 5, we are honored today to have Scott Jarrett, the election director of Maricopa County, join us to talk about election night reporting and tabulation. As commissioners know, Maricopa County, with the leadership of the Board of Supervisors, the recorder, and Mr. Jarrett, have weathered COVID, literally unprecedented attacks on the election, threats to election workers, and the Senate ballot review. And in spite of all that, they still delivered a very successful and historic 2020 election. Now, Scott and his team are hard at work on working to deliver a successful primary election on August 2nd. As election director, Scott leads department operations and sets strategic direction for the Maricopa County election. Obviously, this is no small task, as Maricopa County is the second largest voting jurisdiction in the country and represents more than 60% of the state of Arizona's registered voters. Scott works with the board, county leaders, and the community to ensure the public has an election system that we can rely on and that we are informed on how to participate in the safeguards that ensure that all of our votes count. So it's an honor to have him here. And Scott, thank you so much. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman Meyer and fellow commissioners. I trust that you can hear me.
We can. Thank you.
Great. And I am presenting or sharing my screen, so I have my slide deck showing. So can you see the slide deck? Right.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you for those very kind words. We have been hard at work here in Maricopa County, as with all the elections departments and recorder's office through the entire state. Early voting in the state of Arizona for the August primary started several weeks ago. We are now, if you pay attention to elections, you know elections, we usually do a countdown using E-dates. And so today we're at E5, meaning we're 5 days before election day. I am presenting this calendar here. It shows key dates for the August primary as well as the November general election. Just one thing to point out, if you do have your early ballot affidavit envelope in your hand, in Maricopa County, 78% of our voters are on that active early voting list. It is past the recommended mail-back date. That occurred on Tuesday, but we have lots of voting locations open right now that you can go and drop off your ballot. At any one of those in Maricopa County, we will have emergency voting locations open as well on Saturday and Monday, the day before the election. And then we'll have over 200 voting locations open in Maricopa County on election day, plus several drop boxes at city and town clerk's offices. So if you want to go to locations.maricopa.vote, or I think the great Google map that I just heard referenced, to find your closest or most convenient location to drop off that ballot or vote in person. One other thing I want to point out on this timeline, and this happened actually in August as well, the voter registration deadline falls on a holiday. So for the August primary, it was 4th of July. So usually voters have to register 29 days before the election to be able to participate and actually cast a ballot that would be counted. It moved to the day after, so that was 28 days. That will also happen in October because the voter registration deadline falls on Columbus Day, so it moved to that next date. And then when we get to talking about the canvass results, there is Veterans Day in that holiday period. So that actually extends curing deadlines for conditional provisionals and if someone had a questionable signature. So But here's just some key dates for everyone to monitor as we move forward. So one thing when we're talking about results and canvassing and the timeline for reporting, we go through and we make projections. And this isn't just to support our tabulation efforts, our early ballot processing efforts. It's how many voting locations that we need, how many poll workers that we'll be hiring. Again, these are specific to Maricopa County numbers, not the state as a whole. But what voters can really expect for the August primary, usually we're getting between 83 and 90% of the electorate participating with an early ballot. Those early ballots are either mailed back to us, they're voted during our early voting period, or they're dropped off at any of our early voting locations, or dropped off on election day. That would leave then the remaining 10 to 17% that would be election day voters. And so in a raw number standpoint, that's about 643,000 to 813,000 ballots in Maricopa County that we'd expect to be early ballots, and then 108,000 to 180,000 to be election day ballots. I'll focus mainly on the August primary. Those numbers are in the blue. The red numbers are focused on the projections for November. Again, these are estimates only. So as of end of day yesterday, Maricopa County already had over 470,000 early ballots back and through signature verification, receiving a good signature. We have another about 80,000+ that are somewhere. We've received them back and they're waiting to be signature verified, or they're in a curing process at this point in time. One thing that we've noticed is in-person turnout is up about 150% over 2020. That could be for a variety of reasons. You think back to 2020, as the Commissioner Meyer said, we're right in the middle of that very first large wave of COVID-19. Folks were not out vacationing during the month of July. They're probably in their home sheltering, and they're probably excited to actually get a piece of mail from us and return that ballot. So I think that resulted in a lot of people participating much earlier on in the process. So we were lagging significantly 2020's numbers, but in the last week, we're starting to catch up the number of voters that are participating early as well. But we are anticipating to have a higher number of voters vote on election day in 2022 than we had in 2020. So again, these are all projections, and this information that I'm providing in the left-hand column here is just as of this morning, or really end of day yesterday. And the reason I highlight these is for a county such as Maricopa County that is both central count and precinct-based count, that will affect our election night reporting. And I'll talk about that later on a future slide, but that does impact how quickly and what results are reported on election night. So just a real quick overview of tabulation operations, and specifically transparency and security. And that's really important to any election administrator. How are we being as transparent about our tabulation process as possible while maintaining security and integrity over the process? Should have up here on accuracy as well. I think that's just sort of a no-brainer. Everything that we're doing as far as the integrity, the security, all of those types of things drive the accuracy of the process. I have a few highlighted. There's many, many more. I tried to keep this to 15-minute presentation. I could spend probably a couple hours talking about all of our security. But one thing, and voters have a lot of questions about, is our equipment ever connected to the internet? And the answer to that is no. It's never connected to the internet. And here in Maricopa County, we're fortunate we were able to use HAVA grant funds. And in this picture showing exposed racking and wiring. So anyone that can see enters. We have political party representatives can entirely through our tabulation period. They can trace every single wire from every piece of equipment directly to our server. So now it's a closed network. That means only the devices that are connected through those wires that you can trace to that server are connected to each other. There's absolutely no internet connection. Also, everything that we do is on a 24/7 live camera feed. We have lots of folks even right now recording those camera feeds and monitoring everything that we're doing as well. And we welcome that because we want to be as transparent as possible. We provide statutes requires that it's just during the election process. And when you're tabulating, we actually have it 365 days a year. So every time, every single minute of the day, you can go in and log in and see what's happening in our tabulation center. And then we also require 2 people to be always in there at the same time. So never just one person in our tabulation center. We've made significant improvements even over 2020. 2020 was very secure. Department of Homeland Security has published information that one thing that elections departments need to be considerate of is insider threats. So one thing that we've done is we've installed external canisters around all of our computer equipment in addition to the port blockers that we use, just to make sure someone can't access those ports even when we have a keyboard or a mouse that's plugged into our computer system. So those types of improvements we've made just to minimize the risk that an insider might present to the process as well. Few things, and I'll talk about some of this on a later slide as well. Lots of integrity measures. The only equipment we use has to go through the U.S. Elections Commission's certification process. That's at the national level. The state requires then it go through a state certification process as well. Lots of robust testing from an accuracy standpoint. To get certified, you can only have one inaccurate ballot count out of 5 million different positions. And sometimes the reason that might happen is right when you're running paper ballots, as what we do in Arizona, there could be dust that builds up on the tabulator. One thing that we do in Maricopa County to minimize that is every shift, we're cleaning those tabulators to get that dust out of there. But still, 1 out of 5 million is what has to go through the federal certification process. And then we perform robust logic and accuracy tests before and after every election. If there's a federal contest, a statewide contest, the Secretary of State also comes in and does their own logic and accuracy test. Those results are blind to us. They run those ballots through our equipment and verify that how they filled out those ballots, those results match how they intended them to be reported. One thing that I've heard some misinformation on about the logic and accuracy test is there's only a handful of ballots, maybe 100 ballots or less, that are included in that test, and that's just absolutely not the case. So in Maricopa County, just for this August primary, we had over 3,000 ballots that we ran through as part of the test, and that verifies every single ballot position, every contest on the ballot, and every time so candidates will rotate for an August primary. They have to have an equal number of times that they're at the top of the ballot in that contest. So we test all of that to make sure that our ballots are being accurately tabulated. So on to reporting results. So the very first time that results will be run and reported is 8 p.m. on election night. And those will be early ballots. And for Maricopa County, those are any early ballots that we've received as of Sunday. So for the August primary, that's July 31st. For the general election, that'd be November 6th. So people that have dropped off their ballots or voted them and returned those to us on Saturday, we will be closed Sunday. Those should be included in that 8 p.m. post. Anything that if someone goes and votes on emergency voting Monday, the day before the election, drops off their ballot on that Monday, or drops off their ballot on election day, all of those will be in the subsequent days that follow that 8 p.m. results. Then starting about 9 p.m., and it could go as late as 1 a.m. At least that was the case for the August primary in 2020. If the November general election, our last post was 2 a.m. And if you think about we are the second largest voting jurisdiction, but we're also larger than 7 states. So very large geographic area. So it can take a while for those outlying voting precincts to be able to deliver those memory cards that we need to then upload and report those results. Again, these are in-person voters. We'll be having several posts throughout the night from that 9 p.m. mark to that 1 a.m. mark. So once we get to that last, when we report at 8 p.m., that usually is accompanied by a press release that says and describes exactly what is included in these results and what to expect for the rest of the night. So then, those will be all of our voting locations. So that's the goal, is by 1 a.m., every single one of those voting locations, we've then, and those will be those in-person voters on election day, get reported at 1 a.m. The only thing that wouldn't be included from those election day results, like if there were any misreads at the voting location, those would have to come back to central count to be tabulated. And then also any write-ins from election day, we'll need to take those through the electronic adjudication process. And usually that happens the Saturday after election day is when we go and we tally all those results for write-ins. So what voters can expect after election day. So for the August primary, between August 3rd and August 9th, we will be still releasing and having subsequent reports, usually once a day. And those will also be accompanied by a press release that describes exactly what's included in this and how many ballots are still left outstanding. The reason why August 9th is because there's a statutory cure deadline that allows people to cure those questionable signatures, those provisional ballots. That is August 9th. So we will, that'll be the last time that we're projecting to post for August, as long as we're caught up, right? Everything's running smoothly, which I anticipate it will. We've already been tabulating, thank you to the legislature, and they progressively moved this up. It used to be you can only start tabulating early ballots 7 days before the election day. They moved it up to 2 weeks in 2020, and now they've just said once you've received them, and as long as you've done a logic and accuracy test, you can begin tabulation. So yeah, I am confident, definitely for the August primary, by that 9th, we should have 99.9%, if not all ballots, be able to release at that point in time. In November, it could be a little bit later just because we have so much higher demand and turnout in the November general election. And then mention the conditional provisionals, that cure deadline. So in my first slide, remember with the timeline, we will have Veterans Day that occurs 3 days after the November general election. So 8th, I think it's 11th is Veterans Day. That does extend the cure deadline actually for an extra day. So that will then cause one more day for us to allow those questionable signatures or anyone that was required to vote a conditional provisional. Again, they didn't show right ID, they can bring that in and then have that ballot counted. So after we get through in our final reporting, then we go through a whole bunch of quality control audits, right? Provisional ballot verification, all of our voter registration team is verifying that if someone was asked to vote a provisional ballot, were they truly registered to vote in this election? Did they fill out a paper form and somehow that was missed in that early cutoff that we did? So they're doing those types of audits and then verifying should those provisional ballots be counted. We do a post-election logic and accuracy test. So very similar to the one that's done initially before we start tabulating. We'll do another one that verifies that the program that we're using has not been changed or modified in any way. The political parties do a hand count audit, right? So during the entire time we're doing central count, they're selecting batches that can be randomly drawn for their hand count audit. 3 days after election day, the day after, then the county chairs come in and do a random draw of all those different batches. They also do a random draw of all the different vote centers that would be selected. And then they appoint hand count appointees, again, not our staff. We oversee the process, we provide the facility, but it's the political parties that come in and do a hand count. For the November 2020 general election, it was over 47,000 different contests that were hand counted, and it found our equipment to be 100% accurate. So that's going to occur. Usually it's that Saturday and Sunday after election day when the hand count occurs. And then we also do an election day vote center audit. We compare the number of check-ins at all of our voting locations. We compare that to the number of ballots that are tabulated, make sure that those reconcile. So that will also be done post-election day. And all of that's done to prepare for the canvas itself. So what will happen is there's a board presentation State law requires that the August primary canvass occur 14 days after election day. For the general election, it is 20 days. So that's August 16th or November 28th, because November is so late. It's actually the latest the election can be is November 8th. So that does allow all the way until November 28th for that board presentation and canvass to be done. The canvass will include summary reports and detailed reports, and those reconcile perfectly. So our summary reports will be anywhere from a few hundred pages to low thousands to our detailed precinct report. So we have to report, even though we use a vote center model, we still have to report the results by precinct. In 2020, when we had 740 precincts, we had that detailed summary report was over 10,000 pages. Now we have over 900 precincts. So now that's probably going to be anywhere from 10 to 14,000 different pages for that very detailed report. We also post our cast vote record. What is a cast vote record? That's a record of how every single ballot was voted and every single contest was voted. It even gets down to the level of detail of how much of each oval was filled in and completed for every single contest. Lots of text files for any of those data analysts out there. They can import that, put it into any of their SQL or their servers or any of their systems that they're using to analyze those results. All of that's available on our website. And then we're also required to produce other types of reports, accessible voting reports. So how we comply with ADA requirements at all of our voting locations, training reports for poll workers, who received training, were they successful in their training, voter education / voter outreach, all those different events that we do to inform voters of how they can successfully participate in the election. Also, there's early ballot rejection reports, provisional reports, all of those by precinct. So a lot of information that we have to go through to prepare that canvass and present it to the board. And then the Secretary of State, after we've canvassed, we transmit all those results to the Secretary of State, and then the Secretary of State will then canvass for the November general election. It is the 4th Monday after Election Day, so that's early December when they'll be canvassing that general election. So with that, I'll open it up to chairman or any of the commissioners if you have any questions for me.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. One question I had relates to signature verification on the ballots. I've seen comments about that. Can you explain that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and
that's in the mail-in ballots, obviously. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. So, well, early ballots, right? So even a ballot that goes through early voting and in person, or one that's dropped off, needs to go through signature verification. So 100% of those ballots do get signature verified by a human. Now, this is a statutory responsibility of the recorders within the state of Arizona, not the elections department. In Maricopa County, we do have a unique structure. We have 2 co-directors, so it's me and then my fellow co-director, Ray Valenzuela. He oversees all the early voting piece and that signature verification. But it is 100% done by humans. They go through a forensic affiliated partner. We bring them in. They provide training to the FBI on signature and handwriting analysis. So they provide all of our permanent staff with that type of training. And then we provide very robust training to any temporary staff that would do that. Again, 100% reviewed by humans. We do have in Maricopa County the technology where what we do is we scan in images of those ballots and those signatures. We have then reference signatures for every time someone submitted a form to us. So whether that was a voter registration form, whether that was a early ballot affidavit that was returned in a prior election, some voters have 10, 20, 30 different reference signatures that we can use. So we have a user queue. They perform that initial analysis. What we train them after their training, they don't feel 100% confident that that signature matches. Then they refer that up to a manager queue. That manager will then go and do their own reviews and determine whether we're going to question it, send it back to the voter for them to have to cure that signature. And then even that that first queue, we do a 2% audit of every single good signature, right? Just to make sure, another integrity measure that we're taking to make sure that someone isn't just making signatures good, right? And we hold back that entire batch of signatures until we get through that 2% audit, just to make sure that our staff members are taking their job, taking the oath of office that they took seriously and performing their role accurately.
Thank you. And so just, I mean, how confident are you as the election director of Maricopa County that this signature verification process is as accurate as possible, is accurate?
I think it's every bit as accurate and valid of a process as someone showing an ID, right? If you ask me, what does my signature look like? You'd have no idea, right? And that's the way that most people would. You would have no idea what that other person's signature looks like. We train them on the slants and the slopes and what to look for. Now, there are times where a person's signature can mature slightly, right? And then that's when we end up questioning that signature. But we also train our lead staff to recognize those mature points. But that's actually what a very, very important thing for. Not only do voters sign that ballot, we ask them to put a phone number on that ballot, and that's how we contact them if we do have a questionable signature. But sorry, I can never answer in brief answers, but to answer your true question, I'm very, very confident in our signature review.
No worries. Have you met my good friend Tom Collins? He's also verbose in his answers to questions, which we love him for.
Well, if I could be compared to Tom, I take that as a very, very good compliment.
That was how it was intended. So thank you. And I guess one other question I had before I turn over to my other commissioners is I have read things on social media about what pen you should be using to fill in the ballot. And I see you sort of smiling and maybe reluctantly shaking your head over this question, but can you just kind of explain this to us and how this doesn't impact the process and just explain that issue and let people know there's nothing to be concerned about, if you could.
Yeah, so especially on election day, right? We're very concerned about the ink that voters would use when they're voting their ballot and that it dries quickly. So we've done a lot of testing of the different types of ink that would be successful and the voters would be successful in using when on election day, right? And so what we found is a felt tip pen, because that ink dries much faster than a ballpoint pen. And if you think about you use a ballpoint pen and on any document, not just a ballot, and that starts to smudge on your hand because that ink stays wet for a lot longer. And so in a ballot situation, right, people are voting in a booth, they're filling out their ballot. That could result in them having to spoil their ballot because their hand ran over those ovals. It caused the ink to go into additional ovals that they didn't intend. But for our tabulators, when that ink is still wet, it can really gum up or gunk up the tabulators. And then that would require us to send out technicians to either replace or repair or clean those tabulators. So if that happens widespread on election day, it could be create long lines. So that's why we're advising just use that felt tip pen in the voting booth. We know it. We've put it through logic and accuracy tests. We've done significant testing to make sure that that pen is reliable. Voters can trust the use of that pen. But one other thing, again, have to be verbose in my response. Don't use red ink. Right, or and our tabulators are purposely programmed not to read red ink because we use red pens in our early ballot processing and in tabulation. We don't allow any other color. So that's why red ink is in sort of any variation, orange, highlighters, yellow highlighters, those types of things. So as long as recommended blue or black ink, and if it's election day, that felt tip pen.
Thank you. I think the very first line on my ballot said blue or use blue or black ink. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Chan and Commissioner Kimball if they have any questions for Mr. Jarrett.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Commissioner Chan.
more of a comment. First of all, thanks, Scott, for being here with us today, because I know that you're in the middle of in addition to being in the middle of election, you're in the middle of challenges. So really appreciate the time to come and publicly present about all of the security features that you have in place. I have been involved in election law and legislation since 2001, and I have been proud of our state for all that time, because I think we've always had a fantastic leadership, both at the state and county levels, with regard to security. And I have been dismayed over the past several years seeing what people who don't know anything about elections putting out disinformation purposely is my feeling. Initially, I thought, well, maybe they're mistaken and it's an innocent mistake. It's not innocent anymore. And all we can do is speak out about it. And I think presentations like yours, and thank you to Tom for facilitating all of these wonderful presentations we've been having over the past several meetings. That's the best thing we can do to put the real information out there. And I think the fact that, the red pens, that's a security measure that you specifically program the tabulation machines not to read those, because you don't want your staff to accidentally mark something that could be counted and discount a voter's mark. So that's really all I had. Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back to the chairman and Commissioner Kimball.
Thank you, Ms. Chan. Commissioner Kimball, anything to add?
Well, yes, one question. Scott, I'm from Pima County, and this year we're finally catching up with the rest of the state and doing vote centers. And I've been a poll worker for a number of years, and we went to training last week. And I guess I could say I'm very apprehensive after the training that there seemed to be a huge amount of confusion among people who will be working at the polls, many of whom have never used an iPad, and so it's going to be a whole new experience for a lot of people here. Other than that, are there any changes in the processes that you or your colleagues are going through from 2 years ago because of legislative bills or for any other reason? Or is this pretty much the same process as 2 years ago?
Well, Chairman, Commissioner Kimball, very, very similar process to 2020. There's been a few changes. There's a law passed about moving from Pebble, permanent early voting list, to active early voting list. One thing that we use in Maricopa County is a personalized dashboard, beballotready.vote. People can log in and we show all the recent elections they've participated in and what would be eligible for them to maintain their active early voting status. So that's one change that we've implemented. Another law change was to add additional signage of explaining to voters that are voting in person what is an overvote and whether it be counted if they leave their ballot in an overvoted status. Every one of our precinct-based tabulators notify the voter when that would occur. We've also put signage right around our ballot box that also alerts voters to those types of things. But one of the things that you mentioned was going to a vote center model in Pima County. And we did that in 2020 very successfully. I will say that our poll workers were the biggest advocates for it. Well, voters really like it too. I think that's the number one complaint that a voter has is going to a voting location and being at the wrong voting location. Well, with vote centers, that is eliminated, right? Because they're eligible. We can give them their correct ballot. We have 19,000 different ballot styles in Maricopa County. We can give them their correct ballot on demand using ballot on demand printers. And our poll workers, though, came back with rave reviews afterwards. They're so excited not to have to turn a voter away, issue a provisional ballot. Yeah, I was concerned going into 2022, would this truly work for us, right? Would we be able to set up all of our technology? And I think with good training for those poll workers, getting them used to that, that in-person training is very important. We do in Maricopa County also hire some technical assistance during setup that goes out to all those locations, makes our check-in stations. So we call them site books. Other counties call them e-poll books. And then all of our ballot on demand printers are set up and working properly. But so I wish you well in Pima County, and especially as your experience as a poll worker. And hopefully you have as positive experience as our poll workers did in 2020.
Thanks. One other question, Scott. Is there a change in people who bring in early ballots to polling places? Do they have to show ID?
So if they're dropping off their early ballot, they skip the line and they can go right to that early ballot drop box and drop it right in there. They do not have to show ID. Now, if they're voting early and we're issuing them a new ballot, and even though that's going into an affidavit envelope that has to be signature verified, yes, state law, and this was prior to 2020 actually, a voter would have to show ID to get that early ballot issued to them, and that would occur during early voting or emergency voting.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Commissioner Kimball. One other question that I had that Commissioner Kimball reminded me of, poll workers. I've read where there's issues with people not wanting to be poll makers or be involved because of all the unfortunate things, harassment, what has happened. How is Maricopa County doing as far as the number of poll workers? Do you have enough? Are you comfortable with where you are, et cetera?
Yeah, so from our well, I think recruiting as a whole has significantly improved even in the last few weeks. Our poll workers are looking very, very good, right? We're upwards of over 90% staffed at all of our different voting locations. And as any election official, we building contingencies. So 90% staff, well, we always had a little bit of fluff in those numbers, right? So statute requires 5, because we we'll have some of our voting locations 8 check-in stations. We'll hire up to 11, 12 poll workers for those locations. So if we have 8, 9, 10 poll workers, not the 11 or 12 that we'll be fine. We'll be able to serve those voters. So from a poll worker standpoint, really, really good. What we've had lots of challenges with is recruiting enough central count boards. So commuting down here to our facility in downtown Phoenix, right? But we used some federal grant funds. The board approved us to hire bonuses. So if a poll worker or a central count board worked 240 hours, 4 straight weeks, they got $1,000 bonus. So that really helped us get over that hump and be able to hire all the truck drivers that we need, all of our warehouse workers, all those early ballot processors, right? All of them, we need Republicans and Democrats working side by side through that entire process. So now we're really approaching the numbers that we will be successful in this election.
Thank you. And I promise this is my last question. And that is, we had the opportunity to meet you today, ask questions. And we all know there's a lot of disinformation out there about the election procedures. What do you tell people, or what is your advice to people, and what we can tell people if someone has a question about election procedures, concerns about election integrity, how does all this really work? Where can we send them so they can get the information that would answer their question and show that Arizona elections, Maricopa County elections are safe, secure, and accurate?
Well, there's several different trusted sources out there. Your organization being one of them, right? Lots of materials out there on how election processes actually work. I'd say go to your local county jurisdiction, go to the Secretary of State's. All of those organizations have websites. I know that Maricopa County has been the epicenter of a lot of mismal and disinformation occurring, especially since 2020. We've created, and so some of that information, right, it may be targeted at Maricopa County, and then because we represent over 60% of the voters, then people take that and apply that to other different counties. So I would recommend go to justthefacts.vote. That's a Maricopa County specific website. We have Mythbusters on there. Every really conspiracy theory out there, or at least the ones we've heard of so far, we have information out there debunking and providing accurate information. And I will say, right, there might be some bad actors out there purposely spreading this type of information, but any voter, right? I have people on both sides of the spectrum, the political spectrum in my family, right? And they surround themselves by people that are like-minded, right? They go to those social media accounts, right? And they end up getting fed this information over and over again. So I can see why they might have a question, right? Or have a little bit of distrust. I'd encourage them to go to those trusted sources. Arizona Clean Election, Secretary of State, your county election or recorder's office. And if you're in Maricopa County, go to justthefacts.vote, sign up for our monthly newsletter we send out. And then we also have a new video series, Election Connection, where my co-director, Ray Valenzuela, and I will answer voters' questions. No matter what or how difficult the question is, you submit it to us. We do a monthly video. We answer those questions to get accurate information out there for those voters.
Okay, thank you so much. Scott, I can't thank you enough. This has been wonderful. Tom, any other information? We can let Scott get back to work here unless there's something else.
No, Mr. Chairman, no, I think that was great, and thank you, Scott and Kara for helping set this up. But really important information, and we have had a great opportunity, and I think Gina can attest to this as well. That we've really been able to work with Maricopa County over the past several election cycles, and we're really both pleased and honored to have the ability to support the county election directors both here and around the state.
Okay, so thank you. That will bring an end to Agenda 5. Mr. Jarrett, your screen share is still on. I assume you're probably going to leave the meeting anyway, but I just wanted to let you know that. So then we'll move on back to our discussion on item 3 and the power of fives. I know, Tom, you were providing an update on that and perhaps expressing opinion that the case wasn't moving like you prefer it to. I'd like to just pick back up on that discussion and move forward with the meeting. So Tom, over to you.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to, give just a little bit more detail than perhaps what we've been able to give in prior meetings. I think that, in effect, as I was saying, I think we have a situation where we have the attorneys on their side, one of whom we work with on a regular basis. So I don't want to, be overly critical, but I think getting a handle on the way that Power of Five has bifurcated their representation in a manner that allows us to move forward effectively is not something that we've done as effectively as I would like. And so my hope is within the next few weeks to improve that.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Chin.
I just wanted to weigh in and just, if I understand Commissioner Kimball's concern, and Mr. Kimball, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like the main concern is that we want clarity for people participating as clean elections candidates. Would that be correct? Is that the main concern?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and I think, unfortunately, the way the process plays out is beyond our control to a great degree, just because of the nature of the process. And I think, to me, at least, it's clear where we stand as a commission, I would hope, for folks who want to participate. I know that doesn't solve the issue, but I just wanted to throw that out there. That's how I have to see things because of the fact that we have so little control over, the timeline of the way things play out.
Thank you, Commissioner Chan. Any further discussion on the power of fives issue? Commissioner Kimball, can we move on?
I think we can move on. Thank you.
Okay, so any further discussion on item 3 regarding the executive director's report, enforcement and regulatory updates and legislative updates? Tom, anything further to add on that?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I would add is, Julian and Mike have been, wrapped up the legislative session. And so there is a report on both bills that have passed, which I think is worth bearing in mind as we go into the next month. And then mostly the county association successfully, I think, lobbied against some of the more significant and disruptive changes. And then there is an update on candidate funding for the primary there that I would is worth taking a look at as well. But that's all.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Commissioner Chan.
I just wanted to say that I'm so sorry to hear Julian is leaving us, and sorry he can't be here so we can express our appreciation for his work that he's done for us over the past few years. So I'm sure hopefully he'll hear about that, and wish him the best in whatever his next step is. The other issue I wanted to just comment on is I love TikTok. It's so embarrassing that I love TikTok, but I think it's a great way to share information. And I have really been enjoying the Clean Elections TikToks. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it is personal because I know the staff that's in the TikToks, but I think they're really informative and engaging. And I just wanted to compliment everybody. I think I've seen Gina, Avery, and if I'm not mistaken, I do think I saw Julian in one, but did I? Okay, yeah. So those are the only ones I've seen so far, but really, really enjoying those. And if it were up to me, I'd encourage you to keep that up. Maybe that's the plan anyway, but I just think it's a fantastic way to communicate. So nice work, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Chan. Okay, with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, which is discussion and possible action on Article 3 of the Citizens Clean Elections Commission rules, standards, and conduct for commissioners and employees, and Title 38 Arizona Revised Statutes related to public officers. With the election season approaching in high swing, we wanted to take an opportunity to go over our ethics rules to make sure that the commissioners had a chance to ask any questions they may have and ensure everyone has a chance to touch base about these important issues. Part of what makes our commission successful, a successful institution, is our commitment to the integrity of our election system. And as part of the review of our existing policies, Tom and outside counsel have identified some improvements that will help ensure that we continue to be able to handle the day-to-day challenges that goes along with our government service. So Tom, can you kick things off for us here?
Sure. Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. So, in the spring, the chairman and I talked about, there would be some value to having some outside input on how we look at some of these issues broadly, and that kind of broadened out with the work we did with the attorneys. One of the attorneys is here, I believe just one, Bill Richards from Richards Moskowitz in Phoenix. Those of you who, some of you who worked, certainly if you worked at the AG's office or worked with the AG's office in the last 20 years, you probably know Bill. And if you've litigated an issue of state constitutional law or anything along those lines, you probably met Bill. So, one of the things that we talked through and identified was, not just sort of like, looking at what we should bear in mind. And I think that, our rules are pretty I think people have a general sense of them, and then this background state law, but also how we might improve the processes around them. So, for example, the rules don't, and this is true probably for other rules in the campaign finance arena. I'm not sure, for example, that 16938 does a very good job of articulating how to go about dealing with a conflict. It just says, if there's a conflict, do something. And the EPM basically just says, if there's a conflict, do something. So we wanted to get kind of in the process of identifying a process, in the process of identifying a process. I really like process. I think everybody knows that. And so, we wanted to get there. And so we've laid out some principles in the memo that's attached to this to talk about the steps we might take to sort of integrate a way of addressing issues should they come up. That said, Bill is here and in large part to try to lead a discussion or talk through questions you all may have around these issues. I'll be honest, I feel that in part because of the intensity around elections as a political issue, and I understand that we may not be election administrators in the sense of counting ballots, but the voter education program and the campaign finance program both are part of elections. And so it seemed to me with the level of heat around elections, it was as good a time as any to sort of prospectively talk through some stuff, make sure everybody has an opportunity if they can, if they have questions, if they've had a question you've ever always wanted to ask but didn't know the answer to, those kinds of things. Because, even if the issue today is, stuff like people spreading misinformation about the appropriate type of pen to use, that's not it's not to me likely that any of those issues would say contained within that, right? This is a political issue that will expand and change. And so from my perspective, to complete this now verbose thought, I think it's incumbent on me as an administrator and to sort of talk to put the board in a position where, we have opportunity to be ahead of those kind of issues and make them salient, because we don't have a real good capacity to deal with political. What we've seen in the election world is that election administrators, broadly speaking, that perhaps those who are elected, right? That's a little different, but election administrators themselves are not well equipped to deal with purely political issues, because that's not the structure within which we work. And so what that means is that we have to find ways to make sure that we're, sort of working within our structure to build up the kind of, prophylactic attitude, for lack of a better way of putting it, that I think will ensure that we continue to have the confidence of the voters and our colleagues in election world. So that's a very long introduction. I apologize, Mr. Chairman. But unless you have questions for me, commissioners, I guess it would be helpful to, Mr. Chairman, if you want to consider giving the floor to Bill, I think that would be good.
Thank you, Tom. No need to apologize. And yes, I'll turn it over to Bill Richards. Thank you for joining us. And the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Meyer. I'm not alone, by the way. I actually have a colleague of mine. We're going to tag team you a little bit on this. She is, far less verbose than I am. She's much more succinct than I am. And I'm hoping that means that, we cut down the amount of time and attention you have to give to us. But Natalia Ter-Gregorian is with me. You'll see her in more detail in a moment. We're going to, again, kind of shift back and forth a little bit on these things. But I want to, first of all, thank you all for the opportunity. We're in public session here, and I'm going to treat this as I'm going to put my instructor's hat on, my teaching hat on for a moment. So what I'm going to tell you is going to be more of an overview of some of the issues, and it's just to facilitate a conversation about some things that are really important. As Tom alluded to, I've been representing government officials, agencies, commissions, et cetera, for a long time, since I started practice over 30 years ago. And throughout that time, these sorts of issues of what I want to call, government integrity, public confidence, neutrality, fairness, all of those sorts of things, they're ever present, right? They are baked into our laws in this country and in the state. They are certainly baked into the rules that you have adopted as a commission. And they're important, and we all recognize why they're important. But in your role, they're perhaps particularly important, not only because of what you do and what your mission is and what the statutory mission is for your organization, but it's especially important, as Tom alluded to, at this particular time, because these sorts of issues now can become, for lack of a better term, weaponized as a political issue and a political football and tool. This conversation for me is especially welcome because we are normally called into these things when there is a crisis afoot. The house is usually on fire, there's litigation pending or it's about to be pending, and that's when we get to come in and we get to assist folks like you in advising or representing you. I think it's especially important, though, to have conversations like this where you can pre-plan for these sorts of issues, especially where I see on the horizon in my own experience that, at least for the time being, we're going to face, we collectively as a state and you in particular as a commission involved in the election process, are going to face more and more accusations, allegations about conflicts of interest, biases, lack of impartiality. It's going to happen. I've been involved in those situations with other agencies and other officials. Certainly, I've seen how they play out. I certainly understand, I think, the legal and the practical side of those things. But you have a unique dynamic here where no matter what the legal issues are, and they're very important and they implicate due process and everything else, but no matter what those are, there's an extra element of politicizing these issues that is going to come into play and can come into play very easily in your world. So I think it's very, very, I think it's very valuable that Tom has the foresight to think about these issues and that you all have the interest to give us some time to talk to you about these a little bit. So what we intend to do this morning is, number one, sensitize the commission members to the issue. And that includes, talking about the law that currently exists, both statutorily and in your own regulations that control these issues to the extent that they can be controlled. You have a significant amount of regulatory guidance on this. Number two, we want to briefly discuss with you procedures for handling these sorts of issues when they come up in the context of your work, particularly in deciding contested disputed complaints, which you will be doing now and forevermore. And process, again, as Tom alluded to, is incredibly important. And there is a problem here. This is not a problem that's unique to your organization. This is a problem that exists throughout Arizona government. And that is that when we establish these rules to guide our conduct, right, and to sensitize us as members of a commission, for example, to conflicts of interest and how to deal with them, the expectation is always that they're going to be self-regulating, right? That we're going to set a very clear standard, we're going to set a clear expectation, and that as responsible government officials, we're going to abide by that. And when we have a question about what we should do, we'll get proper advice from folks, and we'll do the right thing. That is the hope, that's the aspiration. Unfortunately, what often happens is there is either disagreement amongst the members of the commission. I'm not suggesting you have that, but there can be as to what those rules mean, how they apply, what they require, or more likely, there will be disagreement between the commission and some member of the public, a stakeholder, a complainant, a respondent before you, who will have a particular opinion about disqualifying interests, lack of impartiality, conflicts, et cetera, and will try and push that. And they can push it in a lot of different directions. And the big problem is, as you can all imagine, it creates, and I've seen this happen, it can create substantial disruption in your work. You don't have enough time and the staff doesn't have enough time to deal with all the real issues that are out there. And I'm not suggesting these aren't real issues. They can be very real issues, but it creates a lot of time and resource burden to work through these issues. And ultimately, they can become a sideshow that basically, interrupts everything and becomes the show. It becomes what is publicly discussed as opposed to the merits of a particular issue that's pending before you. It becomes an issue that is salacious about, the alleged corruption of some member of the commission or members of the commission who refuse to, recuse themselves, despite the fact that they have these glaring conflicts of interest. And that becomes, again, a fundamental obstruction of your mission. And as you all know, your mission statutorily even is to assist, at least part of your mission is to assist in creating greater certainty, greater confidence, greater public trust in the election system itself. And all of these things can really impede and impair that mission. So we're also going to offer you some hypothetical examples. And I'm going to start with that because I think to put these in concrete terms, right, you need to think about real issues that can come up. I want you all to understand, we've not created our hypotheticals from any real world examples that we're trying to emulate. These are really legitimately made up, but they come from, an amalgamation of experiences that I've had and I've seen and things that could really happen. So here's my hypothetical for you. Let's assume for the moment that Commissioner Jones has a father-in-law who owns a printing company that provides campaign signs for most of the major ex-party candidates for state legislative office. The more that those candidates spend with that printing company, the more that the commissioner's father-in-law makes. And the commission is going to hear a complaint that the chairperson of the ex-party encouraged multiple legislative candidates of their party to falsify their campaign accounting to hide their acceptance of large dollars in excess of the early contribution limits, okay? Something that you could be asked to hear. Now, an officer of the Y party has complained that Commissioner Jones must be disqualified because, number one, she has an improper financial interest associated with these particular complaints. And number two, she may be reasonably perceived to lack impartiality, which undermines the integrity and public trust and confidence in the process, okay? Now, that's the hypothetical. Let's take that a little bit further and talk about what would happen in the real world once that allegation was made in your process. What happens next? How do you deal with that? And obviously there's two questions. One is, how do you deal with it procedurally, right? What do we do now? The second is, how do we deal with it substantively? What are the standards that we apply to decide whether or not this really is a problem and we need to do something about it? Well, on the procedural front, and we'll talk to you about this in more detail, the answer is you don't have a procedure right now. Specifically, you have mandatory rules requiring disqualification under certain circumstances. And so the procedural expectation would be there that, the particular commissioner would certainly undertake a review and a very, self-conscious review of those issues. And if they determined that they were in violation of the standards, the rules set by the commission, then they would recuse themselves. But there are a whole lot of other examples, including some of the hypothetical I gave you, where there's not necessarily a mandatory disqualification required. That's implied, it's suggested, it may be the right thing to do, it may be legally required for due process reasons, but there's not necessarily a procedural rule that tells you what needs to happen or how that needs to be decided. The procedural rules do not even explain how the issue would need to be investigated or could be investigated, or what powers individual commissioners have to investigate or to even decide the issue. If a particular commissioner believes, for example, that, I am not disqualified, this is not a disqualifying issue, I've not done anything that, hits the threshold that violates either the state statutes or the commission rules, but other commissioners disagree. How do we get there from here? There's not a specific rule or procedure that you have in place yet to do that. There is a procedure that you have in your rules if the allegation is made against an employee of the commission, but that puts all the onus on Tom as the director to investigate and make decisions. And that makes some sense in his role, his responsibility is overseeing employees. But the commission rules do not give the executive director a decision to make any determinations about qualifications of the commissioners. And again, rightfully so. That isn't the role of an executive director normally. That's the role of you all as the commissioners. Now, substantively, let me throw in a couple of new facts to my hypothetical, right? So you're thinking through this, hopefully in your own minds, going, well, what would I do? What would I think about this commissioner's disqualification? Well, what if you knew, in addition, that the commissioner is actually estranged from her in-laws, that they've written her out of their will, her entire family. There's no communication that passes between them. There's no gifts of any kind that are ever given to this commissioner or her family in any way, and that there's no hope of any sort of resolution of that anytime soon. Would that make a difference? What have you learned, on the other hand, that Commissioner Jones's in-laws provide significant money to her family? That, in fact, they fund her children's college educations or expensive private school tuition, that they, help provide a second home for the commissioner where they can vacation. Would that make a difference as to whether or not there was a disqualifying conflict here? What if you learned that, in fact, let's see. We talked about, so Commissioner Chan, I'm also a big fan of TikTok. I was introduced to it, but I've got 3 adult daughters, and, I fought the temptation. I don't have TikTok myself, but they show me things all the time on TikTok that I am amazed by, just the creativity and whatnot that Americans can bring to that. Let's assume for the moment that you found out that, this commissioner has been posting TikTok videos, incessantly attacking members of the X party, in particular. Would that make a difference, added to the other facts we have here in the hypothetical about whether they should or should not be disqualified? I could go on, and we could layer more and more facts either direction on top of that. I think the point is well made, though, that these are complicated issues sometimes. And when you have all of those facts that make a difference, there needs to be a way to find those facts, right? You can't make a decision in a vacuum. And you would each need the opportunity potentially to investigate, or to have someone investigate, to bring these facts forward. Perhaps it's simply a self-reporting requirement that you impose on the commissioner, that they actually have to provide all relevant facts to the commission. Again, though, there's not currently any sort of rules that you have that address that. So with that, we're going to now just jump into the standards for a moment that do apply, that we know exist in statute and in regulation. This is not going to be a deep dive. You don't have time for that, and we don't have time for that. And we're going to try and hit the kind of the highlights of these things. But I'm going to flip things to Natalia for a moment, who's going to talk to you at first about the statutory conflict issues that are out there, have been out there for a long time, but have, like everything else in the law, have some ambiguities themselves.
Good morning, everyone. Just this. Hi. So what types of circumstances, actions would subject or could subject a commissioner to these types of accusations relating to a conflict of interest? So it's really any type of an affiliation, a relationship, or an activity that leads somebody to believe that the commissioner, either directly or indirectly, tangibly or intangibly, would derive some sort of a benefit based on the outcome of a decision that's pending before the commission. So if the commissioner's decision in a pending action will have some impact, either a benefit or a detriment, those are the types of situations that could breed perceptions of a conflict or suspected conflict, essentially, that could then cause someone to believe that perhaps the commission, the specific commissioner, or the commission as a whole is not capable of carrying out its duties to impartially decide the matters that are presented before the commission. So as a result, that could lead to the public's confidence in the commission's business being undermined. And that is contrary to, as Bill explained, the mission and objective of the commission, because you have this, the mission statement really talks about just fairly impartially, fully administering the Clean Elections Act, but more broader than that is the objective to restore citizen participation and confidence in the political system, improve integrity of the Arizona state government, promote freedom of speech under both the state and federal constitutions, improve the integrity of the Arizona government, promote public confidence in the Arizona political process, and also administer the Clean Elections Act. So we have examples of the relationships or activities that could prompt accusations. And these could be frivolous accusations. These could be accusations that ultimately don't have any merit, but any sort of a direct participation in political efforts. So anything involving the election of candidates, an effort to promote a candidate, an effort to not promote or to promote that a candidate, certain specific candidate not be elected, anything like that, financial contributions, fundraising, volunteering, publishing, supporting documents, anything like that, calls to action, opinions that are disseminated either formally through media sources, informally through social media, or even basically through any sort of messages or communication that are not necessarily subject to public scrutiny or publicly available communications. And those are addressed in your rule that is R2-20-310. And I'm going to refer to them by the last three numbers just to make it a little bit easier on me. So Rule 307 also talks about any sort of a familial or a close relationship with a candidate or a party leader. Also, I think that extends to any party or any individual that is subject to the commission's regulation. You have outside employment is addressed in Rule 308, and that also encompasses any business pursuits and any investments that could lead a member of the public or a party before a proceeding to believe that there is a conflict or some impact on impartiality. And then you have accepting favors, gratuities, gifts, or any other benefits from anyone within the commission's regulation or a party affiliate or a candidate. So in each, and that's Rule 307 as well, in each of those cases, someone might challenge a commissioner's participation on the basis that the commissioner is biased toward or against a specific party pending that is participating in a pending proceeding. So in those cases, we need to look at whether or not the actual statutes and rules mandate that commissioner to refrain from participating in that proceeding. And so the first place that we could look to would be a statute, and it's ARS 38-503, and that is a conflict of interest statute that governs all public officers, and commissioners are public officers as defined in 38-502, I believe. So starting from that premise that you are now a public officer subject to this statute, if you or a relative has a pecuniary or financial or proprietary property interest in the decision, that triggers the statutory obligation to do two things. First, you have to disclose the interest. So you have to, on the record, explain that there is a conflict that either you or a relative has pecuniary or proprietary interest in the outcome of the decision. And as a result, you have to, on the record, explain that you cannot participate in this decision for purposes of, because you have a conflict and you cannot fairly and impartially participate. And so those are kind of the easy conflicts. And let me see if I can share. I don't know if I am set up to share a screen. Do you know if I am?
Yes, any participant can share the screen.
Yes. Oh,
You're good.
can you guys see me or the screen? Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
we can
thank
see
you so
it.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So this is the statute, and I only have A through C on here, but this is the statute that essentially requires a public officer to disclose the interest, in the official records, whether it's on the record or some other manner, and also to refrain from voting or participating in the proceeding that involves the conflict. And like I said, those tend to be the simpler ones. The less, and I should also note that, so the obligations in this statute are enforceable. It could, depending on the level of knowledge, it could be a felony, it could be a misdemeanor, and in all cases, it would require a commissioner to not essentially cease participating altogether if there's a violation of this, not if there's compliance, but if there's a violation, it is enforceable. It's also enforceable through the Uniform Declaratory Judgment Act. And so there are ways to ensure that someone who is appearing before the commission and believes that there needs to be, you know, a disclosure and a recusal, and that's not happening, there's a way for that person to enforce any due process considerations if the statute is involved.
Mr. Chairman and Natalia, can I ask
Yes.
a quick question?
Of course.
I just want to make sure I understand this statute. It just seems like it's purely based on financial interests. So as opposed to, okay, so you're nodding your head.
Yes.
Okay.
I am, and Amy, let me see here. It's actually, we have some helpful case law that has interpreted this statute. And it's essentially, so because the statute talks about a substantial interest, right? And I will talk about the definitions in just a second, but they appear in 35-502. And you'll see a really long definition of what is a remote interest. And then you'll see a substantial interest is just a non-speculative pecuniary or proprietary interest, either direct or indirect, other than a remote interest. And we have had cases essentially interpret this to mean that, yes, usually it's going to be a direct financial interest or detriment. And there's also a 1972 opinion, and it is in the materials in the memorandum that was disseminated that talks about the substantial interest that is implicated in the statute being something that requires a person to gain or lose something as contrasted to a general sympathy, feeling, or bias. So you're absolutely correct in intuiting that the statute is really geared toward a conspicuous or a pretty obvious financial interest. And that is, I think, kind of an egregious example of a conflict that would automatically trigger the duty to disclose and recuse. Oh, 1 second.
I think I'm gonna, Commissioner Chan, just to follow up on that a little bit. The courts have helped define this because the legislative definition has some wonkiness to it. That essentially, it's got to be something that is real. It's not speculative, right? It has to be something that looks like, you do stand to gain or lose something of value. Now, what is something of value? How much monetary value does it have to have? The courts have not said it, that a de minimis benefit is not disqualifying, right? I mean, it could be a very small benefit of some kind, but that there has to be a real potential for that sort of gain or loss for the statute to be implicated. Now, we're going to jump into to kind of make sure that we try and cover the waterfront. The commission's own rules. Natalia already talked to you about some of them that are kind of the higher level rules, and some of the rules that parallel 38-503. Now, you have a bunch of those. By the way, I will tell you, I'm not sure, I haven't surveyed it, but I'm not sure that there is a commission or agency out there or board that has more specific, robust conduct rules and conflict rules than this organization. So kudos to you or whoever generated those originally, because you cover everything. So we're not going to go into the detail of each one of those. Suffice it to say, though, it covers things like, political activity. It covers outside employment activities, right? And it covers especially, catch-alls of any other interests or activities that could lead a member of the public to reasonably even suspect that the commissioner is incapable of, complete partiality, neutrality, and fairness. Now, some of them are easier to apply than others. So, for example, outside employment issues, the rules are a little bit easier to apply because you're talking about a very concrete situation. You're also talking about a situation where there is usually, a pecuniary interest involved there, and you can kind of tell, well, is the outcome, is there a potential or an appearance that my participation in this particular vote will or could have an impact on, my outside employment, positive or negative, either way. there are other rules like participation in political activities that are also fairly specific. For example, there's a prohibition on commissioners providing, direct support of or taking actions or making statements, directly against particular candidates that are subject to your jurisdiction. Okay, and that's seems to be somewhat black and white in terms of its prescriptions. Although the question then becomes, well, what is making a statement in support of somebody, or what is taking an action, to challenge somebody's election? What does that really mean? That's not absolutely clear. But there are, those standards are a little bit easier to apply. When we get though to the more aspirational standards of, don't do anything that might make you look impartial, right? Don't do anything that might let your neutrality be reasonably questioned. Those are admittedly much more difficult to apply. They are, from a personal perspective, I think, given your statutory mission and your regulatory mission that you've given yourself, that those rules and those standards are perfectly appropriate and in fact, necessary to fulfill what you want to do. That doesn't mean that they're easy to apply, and it doesn't mean that you haven't created rules that are going to be open to interpretation and open to potentially even abuse by people who want to use them to try and disrupt the process, make accusations, use it as a political, football to say that they're not getting a fair shake. Those exist. Those possibilities all exist. I will tell you that there's one kind of legal nuance here that we would like to kind of hammer home. We've got attorneys on the commission, right? And all attorneys or anyone who's been involved in our justice system understands the concept of the appearance of impropriety, which governs our conduct as lawyers, governs judicial conduct as well. In that space, though, the courts have basically said, I'm generalizing here, but they basically said that's an aspirational standard, right? That is not really a standard except in certain really unique situations that we can enforce judicially. It's important to have it as an aspiration. Everyone should be trying to abide by that. Let's have no appearances of potential bias or lack of neutrality, but we can't really enforce it. There are some circumstances, though, where it can be enforced. And one is where due process implications come into play, meaning, somebody who's appearing in a judicial or a quasi-judicial forum, which can be people appearing before you, their rights are being decided by someone else. And Arizona law is pretty clear on this, from my perspective, that a commission hearing a disputed matter and making findings on it is acting as a quasi-judicial body, and you have the same obligations that a court does. Same due process, same neutrality obligations that a court does. And you may be subject to mandatory disqualification as a matter of law for lack of neutrality. Those are going to be in a fairly narrow range of circumstances. But what that means is, crafty politicians, lawyers, et cetera, are going to say, hey, I'm fitting you into that narrow range because you set a rule that I don't think you're abiding by. And therefore, you set the standard for what due process is in this particular circumstance, and you're not abiding by it. Therefore, you have to disqualify yourself, and I can sue to have you disqualified if you do not. Also, you have one rule in particular under 309 that specifically invokes an objective standard. It basically says that, and this is 309B, which provides, hold on, let me find the language. We've now pulled it up for you here. I'm sorry, I apologize, C. This is that commissioners shall disqualify themselves from a proceeding in which the commissioner's impartiality might reasonably be questioned, such as in a situation where the commissioner knows that he or she or his or her family member has an interest in the subject matter in controversy or is a party to the proceeding or has any other interest that could be substantially affected by the outcome of the proceeding. That's a very broad rule, but because it adopts what looks like to the law, to judges as an objective standard, it's the reasonable person test. You might reasonably be questioned. That one may not be aspirational. That may be something that a court would say, no, we can enforce this because in Arizona, again, as a general matter, your rules have the same force of law as a statute does. So that's one in particular to be aware of. Let me hit one of the last issues. I'm going to have Natalia kind of jump back in here a little bit to talk about some of the procedural issues and probably start with what happens if you have an issue involving an employee, because there is a process there. And then we can talk about what may or may not happen and how you all can handle these issues when they come up before you.
Yes. So the rules do have a process for addressing conflicts of interest that involve an employee, and that process, very generally speaking, is one pursuant to which there's a complaint or a report submitted to the executive director outlining what the perceived conflict is. Because one of the issues is that the rules that the commission rules are significantly broader than the statute, the conflict of interest statute. And not only because they are not limited to financial interests. I mean, 309 focuses on financial interests, but the remaining rules like 307, 308, they go far beyond just financial interests and go to anything that could, cause someone to perceive that there is a bias or some impartiality or some benefit to be gained. And so that's one issue. But if there's a concern regarding an employee's conflict, then that process is simple. Somebody submits the reported concern. The employee has an opportunity to respond in writing, and then the executive director gets to kind of assess, all of the materials and determine whether or not there's actually a conflict. And in terms of employees, that would apply, particularly with other employment or something like that, where it's the executive director can assess whether or not there's an incompatible outside employment, or whether there are activities that are incompatible with the employee's duties as an employee of the commission, or the Clean Elections Commission. So that is the process. With regard to public officers, which includes commissioners, we don't have anything like that. We don't have a parallel process. And so that creates an issue for a couple of reasons. And Bill already talked about kind of the main ones about how it can be weaponized. But also it prevents the possibility of disposing of these issues and essentially weeding out any meritless concerns, so that there is some confidence in the public that, hey, there was a concern that was brought to our attention. This is the process we follow to investigate it and look at it. And, a lot of other regulatory bodies and boards have a process for essentially summarily dismissing complaints or alleged misconduct that has no factual basis, is essentially meritless. So the commission currently does not have a process like that applies to commissioners, and that's somewhat problematic. And the other issue, so we have a definition of conflicts of interest in your Rule 302 that is, again, broader than the statutory definition. And it's any private interest that is or appears to be inconsistent with the efficient and impartial conduct of a commissioner's official duties and responsibilities. But private interest isn't defined anywhere in the rules and the statutes, so it becomes somewhat ambiguous. And so given all of the ambiguity, and it's funny because the rules are also very specific in terms of the conduct that's prohibited, but then there's also this ambiguity in terms of how expansive are these rules going to be construed and whether or not they are enforceable or aspirational. And so even under an objective or a reasonable person standard, given all these ambiguities, it may make sense to implement some sort of a process that allows the commissioners and the commission to address these issues when they arise.
And so let me go ahead and pick up there with the kind of the final piece of this, which is, what process could you apply right now if someone were to make an accusation tomorrow? I have a suggestion for that, which is, not mandatory. There's a whole bunch of ways to handle these issues, but an appropriate way would be to, number one, require that your executive director do exactly what he does with everything else and the staff does, right? Get the facts for us. Provide us the information about what the allegation is, get as much specificity as possible, and present it for consideration by the commission. Also, as part of that, you're probably going to want to get some legal advice on the, whether or not this allegation has legs, whether it, really does implicate something, or whether it's a, kind of a throwaway that really doesn't stand the test of the legal test of actually proving a violation of anything. And then have a discussion about it. It is perfectly appropriate for the moment for you to handle these issues as you handle a lot of other matters that come before you, which is to have a public discussion and vet these issues with the opinions of the commissioners shared in an open proceeding. And I think that is consistent with the way your rules are structured already, that the expectation would be that either a commissioner, upon someone raising the issue, a commissioner may individually take their own action and say, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I didn't think about that. I didn't even realize we had this complaint, but I realized I should probably bow out. I'm setting my own standard here, and I'm going to go ahead and recuse myself, in which case no one needs to discuss anything. Simply need to put on the record that that particular commissioner has decided to recuse themselves. If they've decided not to, however, I think the expectation of the rules at this point is that you'll have a discussion about that. Each commissioner will be able to weigh in with their opinion, and the affected commissioner or commissioners will at that point be able to make an informed decision based upon all of this input, including the legal input that may be provided, the staff input that will be provided, and the other commissioners' opinions and input that will be provided. And I think the expectation is that that system will work pretty well, and that there probably, in most cases, will be some sort of a consensus and agreement on what the appropriate response is. Does the commissioner disqualify themselves, or don't they? At which point then the individual commissioner still makes the decision, but they make it with that sort of input. And I think the expectation generally is that most commissioners are going to go along with the group, go along with the consensus after this has been responsibly vetted. That's the best approach that I think you have available to you today. However, you can take each one of those pieces that I just talked about, and you can formalize those as well. You can formalize requirements for the complaint, that the complaint has to be provided in writing with specificity, with facts, with backup evidence, all of those sorts of things, so that folks cannot simply take advantage of the fact that you have these rules and try and disrupt things with just vague, ambiguous, unfounded allegations. You can also formalize the what I'm going to call the investigatory or discovery process, where you have rules that assign responsibilities to the staff, for example, to gather certain information, or perhaps set expectations that the commissioner affected will provide a response, or at least be allowed to provide a response in writing that provides their own evidence on the subject. And then you can set different sorts of procedures for consideration, for formal consideration, informal consideration, evidentiary, taking of evidence. You may not want to do any of those things. You can set it up as formal or as informal as you would like. And at the end of the day, I believe that, you could certainly argue that it would be consistent with the delegation of authority you have from the legislature to allow the commissioners themselves to vote on qualification, disqualification, with lots of legal parameters put on that. There's some question, though, about whether or not your delegation of authority from the legislature would allow you to go that far, or whether ultimately, if the commissioner makes an individual decision that they're not going to recuse, or that becomes a judicial issue. It certainly can always become a judicial issue, and you may not want the rest of the commissioners voting on those sorts of things. Those are all the different options, though, that you have to consider, and worthy of consideration, probably. So. With that, that's kind of our presentation, but I suspect that there may be questions that you have, and I want to make sure that we answer whatever we can. And I see now, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, I see, for example, that Commissioner Kimball has raised his hand, and if you don't mind me calling on people and recognizing them for their question, I'd be happy to do that.
Commissioner, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner Kimball.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. I think Commissioner Chan touched on this, but you point out in your report that the rules require a commissioner to avoid actions that cause or create the appearance of losing or compromising the commission's impartiality and the public's perception. That seems to me so sweeping as to be not helpful at all in terms of guidance to us. The rules also talk about that we need to prohibit that we are prohibited from activities that affect candidates subject to the jurisdiction of the commission. In other words, state candidates. But if I, for instance, want to get involved in a campaign for a local office, not run, but support someone, or for a federal office, that is not an office subject to our jurisdiction, but it could also be argued that my activity might create the appearance of compromising my impartiality. So do you have any guidance on this that would be practically helpful to me, for instance?
Maybe. Let me suggest something, which is that, traditionally, our law says that in construing statutes and regulations, the specific governs over the general. And I think that you could consider one position that's, I think, is reasonable is to consider that more specific limitation, the one that says, the political activity issues are really concerned with your support or opposition to a candidacy that's within your jurisdiction, right? That helps define what is a disqualifying action creating the appearance of impartiality or lack of impartiality. So in other words, you could say, well, look, we've defined that, we're only on the political side, the political activity side, we're really only concerned about your activity or support of or opposition to a candidacy within our jurisdiction. Therefore, that means that specifically me supporting a local candidate or me supporting a federal candidate does not run afoul of the more general rules that say don't do something that creates some sort of appearance of bias or impartiality. I mean, I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I can't guarantee the courts would agree with that, but I think that's certainly consistent with the law.
Okay, and I'm also thinking of some issues. What if we as a commission speak out and say, there's been a lot of talk that the last election was stolen. That talk is untrue. Are we then saying that because a number of candidates under our jurisdiction, that's one of their main running points, so we should not say that?
So I just want to interject here. I mean, we're not. The point of this is to get very general, broad, sweeping legal advice. So if this is, when we get into specifics, if we're actually going to ask for legal advice, I don't know that should be in this forum.
Well, I understand you, Mr. Chairman, but I'm just
throwing that out there to hear what. To get Bill's response to that. And I'm just throwing that out there. So.
Okay, thank you. Good point.
But Bill, I mean, what is your response to that issue? Because I know exactly what Mark is asking, Commissioner Kimball's asking. In fact, it's something that we wanted to raise, but go ahead, Bill, can you respond to that?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, any lawyer, this is my personal opinion, any lawyer's advice is always better when the question is more specific, right? So the more general the question, the less likely the legal advice is to be very helpful. So I think that discussing these issues is often, it's often better to have a very frank discussion about much more specific examples of things. And I think that Commissioner Kimball is kind of heading that direction to provide you legal advice, which we are providing legal advice to the commission as well. But in that role, it would be better to answer those in executive session, I think. And that allows for, again, what executive session is intended for, which is to get you, full and frank legal advice on specific issues. And I would propose that if you want to get that kind of down to that kind of granular detail, that we move to executive session. And Tom,
Sure. I don't think we put in the agenda that we may go to executive session, so I'm not sure.
I see it at the top, Mr. Chairman. It's not on this specific
Oh, okay.
piece,
Well,
but I believe it.
Let me just say, I'm just using that as an example, as if we get into issues identified with any candidate or group of candidates, do we have to be careful?
And I'm happy to answer that sort of more generally, because Tom, did you have an objection to be answering that more generally, or?
Well, no, Mr. Chairman, if I thought I didn't mean to. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sort of lagging a little bit. Mr. Chairman, I thought I might have a way to reframe that question in a way that gets at the issue from a different perspective, but might be a little bit more optimized for this context. And then if you want to go into another context for that.
Well, go ahead. And if we want to go into executive session, we can go into executive session. So
Right. Okay.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Tom.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Kimball, thank you for allowing me to interrupt you. And Bill, I think one way to look at this is more broadly, but I think has a legal answer, or I hope of some kind, is, look, the statute says that the commission promotes participation in elections, right? That's one of our goals. You bring people into the election. That's part of how you push corruption out of the election. So, for example, in our voter education program, which is subject to the same rules, we deal with the question of how to engage with candidates there, or in our voter education pamphlet, where candidates who, so there's a constant engagement with candidates that's not necessarily regulatory, but, our voter education program, as you've now seen, right, in this meeting itself, is not neutral on the question of voting. It's not. So with that in mind, Bill, maybe that might help to give you some contours within which to sort of talk about this more generally. And then if obviously, yes, Mr. Chairman, I have no opinion. If you want to go into that, that's obviously your discretion. So.
Yeah, I would start that response then, Tom and Commissioner Kimball, with a couple of legal thoughts. Number one, as a statutorily created and empowered agency, the courts recognize that you have significant discretion, okay? You have significant discretion in kind of defining your principles and mission under the statutes. And then you have significantly more discretion in defining and applying your own regulations, your own rules, okay? Given that, I think Tom's point is well taken, that, it would be within the discretion of the commission to recognize all of these competing objectives, right? Or seemingly competing objectives. I'm not going to say they're actually competing, but seemingly competing objectives that, hey, part of our principal purpose is to instill confidence in the election process. Therefore, we could interpret our impartiality, neutrality, conflict issues consistent with that is an overriding purpose. And if in fact, it legitimately, whatever the commissioner has done, legitimately serves one of those purposes, then it may not qualify as something that, falls within our neutrality, impartiality, or conflict concerns. I think that the commission has significant discretion there. That discretion legally, to get it, to have the courts back up your use of that discretion, it's always going to be best to have a public discussion of that and a consensus reached, right? Once you've acted responsibly to gather the information, have a public discussion about it, and you've reached a discretionary decision like that, saying, now that doesn't trip the wire on impartiality, because it is consistent with our fundamental core purpose and the statutory obligation that we have to talk about X issue, right? I think that it'd be very unlikely that a court would step in and say that you decided that wrong, right? You had created this standard, and I'm going to step in as the court and say somehow that no, your general rules about impartiality and neutrality somehow govern here. I think it's very unlikely that they could or would do that. Certainly would not be consistent with the law as I have read it for many years now. So I hope that helps clarify things. I know it doesn't clarify things on any, again, specific granular level. I'm more than happy to talk about any specific issues in an executive session and provide specific legal advice.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Richards, thanks. That answers my question. I was not trying to get a specific legal answer to a specific question. And I would rather have this discussion in public because I think it's a valuable discussion. So I'll try to keep it as general as I can. But that was my major question. I feel out of place here. I'm looking at my Zoom screen. I'm surrounded by lawyers, and I'm the only one here who's not, I think, with the possible exception of Avery. So, by
the way, that's a good thing for you.
Well, I would agree, but I wouldn't have said that. But thank you. I think you've given me some good guidance without getting into anything too specific. Think you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman and Bill, if I could just, I want to say, first of all, I appreciate Mark bringing that up, because I think we've seen over the past several years that there are some issues that seem to have become partisan, even though I haven't thought of them as partisan traditionally. And what I was going to bring up for the commission is whether, and I don't mean to shortcut, we can continue discussing. I have really enjoyed the presentation from Bill and Natalia. I think it's been very helpful, very informative. I frankly find it easier to absorb things when we do something like this rather than me just reading something. It's just a peculiarity of my brain. So this is super, super helpful. I really appreciate it. But what I was going to ask is whether we as a commission should direct Tom to draft some specific rules about, I don't know if we want to call it a complaint, but some sort of procedure like this. I know, for campaign finance complaints, there are procedures in place at my day job that I'm very familiar with now. And, so we receive something, we turn it around in 5 days to the person who's complained about. We ask them for a response within 30 days, something like that, that perhaps Tom could put together that would be appropriate in the context of conflicts or accusations of conflicts. If that would be the direction to go from this point forward, unless there is other discussion or questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Chan. And Tom, I'll let you answer that, I guess, but the memo in the packet, does reference like a 7-step process or in developing a process. So is that what you're recommending, or what are your thoughts on that?
Chairman, or you're asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Chan, yes, that's the direction we'd like to head in. the steps are outlined there because it's sort of like, if you look at, I can't remember which specific number it was, but the rules for how to deal with complaints, or maybe complaints is the right word. We can work on the right word for that, but issues with employees. Those steps. The steps in the memo are basically the same, are reflective of those steps. So the idea would be to take those steps and codify them into some rule language. Open a docket and go through that. Process. I think, and I think I've understood, Bill, to kind of say for the interim period, if something has, and again, this is like I think I made a joke earlier about, if you were being told how to, prepare for a plane emergency. This is in the same kind of nature, right? I think Bill's outlined, and I think that memo outlines essentially what steps we would follow informally if we had something come up. So that's really where we're headed. So the next meeting, we would like to have now, why start a regulatory agenda in the middle of the election cycle, even though it won't be effective till after the election cycle? The reality is that with the process that we now have to go through, which has a few extra steps in it time-wise, I've found that I end up underestimating the calendar in the wrong direction, so stuff comes online a little later than I would like. So given that I don't anticipate this being a particularly difficult discussion in terms of, the language nuance, right? Obviously that can go through, but the principles are going to be pretty easy to work through. So the idea was, why not, assuming the agenda is not otherwise overwhelming, started sooner rather than later. And then with the idea that, and we've sort of said publicly here today, if we get something going in the next quarter, we kind of have a sense, I think, of what the steps would be. So, so that's kind of my thinking on that, Mr. Chairman.
So Tom, you don't need a motion on that, right? We can just give you a request that you go forward with that process.
It is. I don't know. I don't need any. I guess I would need a denial if you don't want me to do it. That was my plan. So. Well,
Commissioner Chan, Commissioner Kimball, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we would like you to move forward with that.
Yes.
For the next meeting.
Yes, I am in agreement with that.
As am I.
Okay. Thank you. Bill and Natalia, thank you. Are there any more questions for Bill and Natalia, or any more discussion points on agenda item number 4? Okay, thank you again, Bill and Natalia, so much. It was very informative and well done. Really appreciate it.
Our pleasure, obviously, and Tom knows how to get a hold of us if other questions come up. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so now let's move on to agenda item number 6, which is public comment. This is the time for consideration of comments and suggestions from the public. Action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter or rescheduling the matter for further reconsideration decision at a later date, or responding to criticism. Does any member of the public wish to make comments at this time? You may also send comments to the commission by mail or email at ccec@azcleanelections.gov. Anyone in the public? I don't see anyone there. Okay, no public comment. So then we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is adjournment. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn.
Thank you, Commissioner Chan. Is there a second?
I second.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Let's go ahead and vote. Call the roll. Commissioner Chan.
I vote aye.
Commissioner Kimball.
Aye.
And this is Commissioner Meyer. I vote aye as well. Motion carries unanimously to adjourn. Great seeing you all. We will see you next month, perhaps in person. Who knows? But take care, everybody.
Everybody. Be well.
You too.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.